Hello, everyone. This is Bob Lowe, CSIA Executive Director. Thank you for attending the July CSIA webinar. Today's webinar will provide you with an understanding of the importance of managing and maintaining your intellectual property. If you have a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A panel. The host and sponsor of our monthly webinars is Software Toolbox, a CSIA partner member. Software Toolbox helps systems integrators lower their risk on projects that involve software by providing them a unique mix of off-the-shelf software products and rapid response technical support that minimizes the need for custom code and lowers field startup time risk. I would like to introduce today's webinar presenter, Brad Walker. Brad is the president of ASECO Integrated Systems in Oakville, Ontario. ASECO is a CSIA certified member. Brad has an electrical engineering degree and MBA. He has worked mostly in manufacturing with a focus on operations and general management. About 5 years ago, he moved into the control systems integration industry with ASECO, where he has successfully applied manufacturing processes to the business. He discovered IP was one of the areas where ASECO had to put real effort. Obtaining IP from their customers was by trial and error, and he is happy to help CSIA members reduce the error part of that learning process. So, without further delay, here's Brad.
Thank you, Bob. So, guys, everybody, thank you for joining. And what I really wanted to do today is we'll go through and I'll introduce ASECO and myself a little bit. I don't think that's terribly relevant, except for talking about why are we doing IP. And I think that's massively relevant to all of us in the Western world in terms of how do we continue to prosper as businesses, because I'm sure you guys are seeing the same thing as we see from purchasing guys to say, I can go buy this from India or China or some other part for $20 an hour or $30 an hour, and I'm sure you guys are the same as us, where we pay our guys $20 an hour and $30 an hour. And to us, the IP is really the piece that allows us to get past that hurdle, and it's no different than John mentioned on the software toolbox. If we bring the right IP, we can actually reduce the dev cycle and the cost associated with dev, and we can reduce the commissioning cycle. So in that respect, everybody wins, and the price starts to move out of the price per hour starts to move out of the discussion points, and you get into the real discussion to say, how do we solve the customer's problem, and how do we get them to a solution that makes the customer money in the end? So that to me is really the piece behind the whole part, and this agenda is lined up to try and help us go through that sort of stuff. So, ASECO, we're not a big business. I mean, I guess we're reasonable size compared to the integration world, but we're not a big business. Most of us are relatively small businesses. And I really got started with this with Bob when we got talking about, and I forget how we got it started, but we got talking about how IP had been very helpful to ASECO in helping us to get on and move forward as a business and move forward with some customers. And that's what got us to saying, well, why don't we talk about this for the community? Because, again, I don't think this is a competing issue between us. This is really about how do we help ourselves win with our customers, and how do we make sure we win in terms of keeping work into the Western world in North America. So if I look at IP and I talk about what's the big issues, I think some of the positives are very, very obvious. I mean, if we get our IP secured and we have the intellectual property in our hand, it enables us to do reuse from project to project to project legally. And I'm sure we have some reuse going on out there. I guess the debate at times is whether it's legal or not, or whether it's appropriate. The cost down part for the SI and the customer, and again, I think that's relatively obvious. If we have strong IP pieces and we understand how they hang together, there's a bunch of stuff that's a copy and paste exercise that we can bring from project A to project B to project C, which spans multiple customers, which certainly reduces our cost, and if we're fair to the customers, then we can reduce the price we charge them, and hopefully everybody's a winner. But the part I think starts to get even more powerful is it allows us to build our long-term positions with customers. If you've done a good job for a customer and have partnered with them, and you bring them some stuff for free, or free or relatively low cost, you build that relationship with the customer, and you then have him for your customer for a very long time. And I think that's another part that using some of your IP is exceptionally helpful for, and it also helps you build your relationship with a business that we'll see a little bit later, or the business partners in the customer, and we'll see a little bit later where I think that's particularly useful. we'll talk about the focus for internal resources. I'm sure CSIA isn't the only one that has engineers that are not invented here beings, but it helps us understand and helps us focus some of those guys, or certainly for CSIA, it helped us focus some of those guys to say, we're shooting at this because we've got a plan that stops some of the not invented here syndrome and helped us to get people pulling in the same direction. And the last one is the one really for our purchasing. As we talk to purchasing and they start with, you know, I can get it from India, I can get it from China, or I can get it from wherever for lesser on a per hour basis. Purchasing tends to measure the input price. They rarely measure the output that you get for that price. Using your case to say I'm bringing IP helps you move the conversation away from the input price and helps you move the conversation to what you get and what's the output you get, which is a much more positive conversation for us to get into rather than just simply he's $100 an hour, you're $105 an hour, clearly he should get the job. And we all know, we've all been in situations where the guy who low bid it didn't either do the job, or by the time they paid to get it all done and dusted and corrected with that customer, it cost them more anyway. So why are we going to secure our IP, and what's the negative side of that? I'm sure, clearly we don't want to sort of admit this, but I'm sure there's bits and pieces of code that have moved from customers to customers from all of us that technically should never have done that. Will that become an issue? The answer is I don't think so in lots of cases because we're not consumer products. But if you've got customers that are competing and they ever figure out that you've let IP leak between those two, I can only say I think you're going to have yourself a tiger by the tail at some point in time. And the other one is that if some of those leakages are occurring, by starting to talk about IP, it's easier to get the guys to say, hey, you got to be thoughtful about these pieces and not let that leakage occur. So I think those are one of the big issues if you don't do that, or if you don't look at that. That stuff's out there. And the one that sort of was the attention getter for CSIA was the lawyers that are going out trawling around for IP and seeing who's stepping on each other's IP. Most of that's directed in the consumer industry, but sooner or later, that's probably going to start moving into the SI industry. And the sooner we get ourselves sorted out, the less risk we'll have if that ever comes our way. And I think the other one is that if we have if you have IP, sometimes, and I know we've dealt with customers where they're paranoid because some SI has sort of held them to hostage because they won't give them source code, or they won't do this, or they won't do that. And you can hold IP, and I think there's no doubt that in the very, very short term, that gives you some leverage over the customer. But I have to say, in the longer term, most of the ones, and some of those customers that had those problems have become our long-term customers because they felt they were being held over a barrel and all those other things. So I think it is a double-edged sword, but I think in the end, if you hold a customer hostage with IP, that's one of the issues that's going to get you in trouble in the long haul, because they feel like they're getting ripped off, and we all have that thing, where maybe it didn't cost you that much, but if you feel like you're getting beat, it kind of breaks the relationship. And because we know that people don't do a great job at describing exactly what they want, and there's always the CR list, then breaking that relationship doesn't tend to do you favors in the long haul. And I think this is one of the easy ways to create or break that relationship if you hold a person hostage with IP. And clearly, just for clarity, when I say hold a person hostage with IP, I mean that sort of work product IP, not licensed material IP, as in, hey, I'm selling you a licensed product. To me, that's entirely different, because they sold them a licensed product. They're going to be a EULAR, and as part of that EULAR, you will have whatever you have as your rules inside that EULAR. So internally, I talked a little bit about engineers and computer science types suffering badly from the not invented here. And I'd have to say, in a lot of cases, the more clever the guys are and the more creative the guys are, the bigger the not invented here syndrome becomes. And in that particular issue for us, if we get that big not invented here syndrome, it just gets tougher and tougher and tougher to stop people from recreating the same solution time and time and time again. By starting to say we were getting behind IP and we're using this IP and that's how we're going to take it from customer to customer to customer, it got far easier for a CSIA to have people actually stop the not invented here. Did it go away? I'd be telling you tales if I said it went away. But did a lot more of it go away? The answer is absolutely yes. So I think that's one of the big positives, is that it actually allows you to present the plan and stand up in front of your guys and present the plan to say, guys, this is where we're going, and I need you to get on board with that plan. And it won't make it go away, but at least then as you have the conversations and you bump your head and have the problems, it allows you to have a conversation with people to say, those are the things we need to address, guys. Can you please not do that? We need to stick with the program and stick with the plan. And at least it's a much more positive conversation in terms of trying to get control and trying to get the guys to do what they need to do. The other part is you're going to try and build out your IP. Certainly we've tried to, and we've had some successes. We try to build some IP out through each project. So there is no solution here with one single project and, wow, I'm going to have an all-encompassing solution. So part of it was trying to understand, what do we want to go? Where do we want to get to? What's the general direction we have? And then start looking at the projects as they come in and start saying, well, how can I build out some of my white space? Well, I guess first of all, what's the reusable pieces we need to bring to the party for each one of those projects, and how does that relate to the price we're going to charge the customer? And two then became, what do I then want to build out from that project to go back to the general pot, if you want to call that, of IP? And it meant that you had to start getting an overview of all the projects, and you have to have your general directions, and you have to have some mechanism that allows you to see how those two link to then define what's the white space that I want to be filled, what I want to fill. And I have to say that was a challenge for us. It took us a while to figure out how to do some of those things, but it was all about getting some central control pieces on what's the projects coming in, what's the general direction we're getting going, trying to get the technical guys to get some general direction defined. And I think the other side is, I wouldn't say you have to get your general direction defined perfectly. You have to get it, and the term we use is you have to get it directionally defined, as in we're going east, not necessarily, or we're going northeast, not necessarily bang on northeast, but we're going in that direction. And that helped us to say, hey, we're building out some of those things. And then periodically you got to go back and review that stuff. And the one for me that's key is, we have to be committed to working on IP and getting IP and keeping it forever. The second we start saying, well, yeah, okay, maybe this is a one-off, or maybe we won't do that, or okay, you go just do what you want to do over here, it's like opening up Pandora's box again. As that comes in, that not invented here syndrome starts coming back harder and harder and harder. And it's okay if you can't get IP from the customer to say, well, we're not going to do that, because that's very clear. It's outside of that strategy piece. If you do have IP from the customer, or you do have some sort of IP from the customer, then you've got to drive it back through the whole model, or else everybody says it's, the free-for-all and the not invented here syndrome tends to come back and creep out again. And that may be more a focus on some of the people we have working for us, but certainly as I've worked around in my career, that most companies and most engineers have certainly had that trait overall. So I think that's one, is that if you're going to get committed to IP, you need to get committed and say, this is the way we're going to go forever. And externally, customers don't just fall over and say, yeah, you know what, you're right, you guys deserve this. And I think there's a couple pieces you got to look at in there. First of all, customers are not homogeneous. When we talk about a customer, we all sort of start off by thinking of them as, the customer. But the reality is there's all sorts of competing groups inside that customer, and each one has their own agenda. So if you take purchasing and legal, for example, their agenda, they don't care whether we do a project and whether it's cheaper, or maybe they care a little bit about cheaper, but they don't really care about us doing a project cheaper or better or faster, because that's not how they're measured. They're measured on, did I give away some of our business technology? Yes. So their easiest position is to simply say no. And that causes those guys to get into kind of a land grab position. And that land grab position starts with, they think that's their lowest risk point. And unless we're pushing back and defining to them why it's not their lowest risk point, we can do that, then you're going to get yourself in trouble. So to me, that's where you got to start parsing up and understanding each business position, each business unit's group. So you've got the legal guys, and they're just worried about making sure no IP slips out. But they don't understand the space. So when you actually talk to them to say, well, gee, I'm bringing you this code, and let's assume you've got agreement to say, I get to retain what I bring, and you say, gee, I'm bringing you this code, and you guys happen to be the first ones going to SQL 2007 or 2008. We're the ones that are this is the first time we've ever done the linkages to SQL 2008. I need to retain that, or else I can never bring that code to anybody else in SQL 2008. The legal guys usually go, oh, yeah, okay, fair enough, yeah, we can do that. Well, you just started to move them from there, you can't have anything, to, yeah, that doesn't matter. Now it's really a game of then starting to figure out how do you move them down the road a little bit on that one. The same with purchasing. Purchasing just simply says they like to measure the inputs. And when you start to say, but gee, if I bring you code, and it's just like John talked about for Software Toolbox, I'm bringing you code, it's tested, it's proven, it's robust. All of a sudden you say, you're not paying me to develop it, and the commissioning cycle will be lower because it's already developed and tested and robust. All of a sudden you're starting to say, guys, this is a win for you getting that stuff in there. And you may have to show them in some of your calcs how, or some of your development of the price, how that worked out or how that plays through. But that's the part where you can start to get those guys to go, oh, well, actually, maybe this is a win for me. And they all of a sudden don't perceive the IP piece or no IP to us as an SI as a low-risk position. We can actually start to pitch it as you're adding risk to the project, and especially if they're fast projects, because that's the other one, is that the speed goes up. The risk goes up, but as the speed goes up, if we can bring IP in, it helps to take some of the risk out of doing a quick project. So I think those are the parts where you have to start saying each group is different, what's their issues, and then the other part is the business unit. If you can get the business unit you're working for, so whether it be production or whether it be a site or whoever it is, or you know, maybe it's a division of the big company, if you can get those guys on board, they also can help point you through the maze, I guess I would call it, of some of the customer issues. And, you know, well, here's his agenda and here's their agenda and this is what they want to do. And, you know, we get lots of feedback from the business guys to say, you know, purchasing just has to show a 5% gain. You know, how do we show them a 5% gain? And if you can get to that, then you're starting to say, okay, we can now start to solve everybody's problem. And the customer that was quite non-homogeneous, you know, if you can start to figure out everybody's issues, starts to look like a more homogeneous beast that you can manage from afar as an SI to get your stuff done. So, and hopefully that helps people sort of see how we can use IP actually as a positive rather than just simply saying, I want IP, you know, and getting into a contradiction of you can have it, no you can't, yes I can, and that's just not a positive one. So then if you get into that IP negotiation, and assuming you can parse it up and see who the different pieces are, to us there's 4 positions that you can have. You can simply concede IP and say, right, don't care. And there are a few customers where SQL will do that, but the honest answer is we don't walk that road very often at all, and I would suggest that in the end all of us need to not walk that road very much. I think as a minimum we need to retain what you bring. And usually, and we'll talk a little bit about how you negotiate that, but usually we can get to retain what you bring without too much problem. We then sort of have the next phase is where you can get the guys or you can get people moved on, is if you say, well, if I get to retain what I bring, can I have the extensions to that? Because if I can't have the extensions to that, then bringing you what letting you retain what I bring, that means if I build out an extension, I can't build a good extension for you because I can never use it again. Now, come on, can I have that stuff? And you can usually get conversations going around that where they say, yep, okay, yeah, I can see how you do that. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how we do that. And then their nirvana is own it all, get all the IP. And I guess the biggest one I put in there jointly, because and certainly in our experience, if we say we own the IP, that creates all the headaches for the customer of, oh my, you're going to, I'm going to be held hostage somewhere along the line, and I'm not feeling comfortable. And if you say, look, we can join it, or you guys can jointly own it, You guys have the rights to use it in turns inside your business. You don't need us to do that in the future. That goes a long, long way to helping you get that conversation going and get business unit support to help you drive that conversation back through the legal and the purchasing guys. And that's really where we're talking about understanding all the players' motivations. Because even within purchasing and legal and the business unit, even within there, you also have people in there that may or may not have consistent views on what they need to do or what they don't need to do. So purchasing can all be about, there are some purchasing guys that are all about lowest cost, and they don't want to recognize anything about risk or timelines. But there may be other guys that if you can get to that are a bit more thoughtful about those areas. So again, it's trying to get, business support, the business unit to say, here's the guy you should appeal to, or here's how you get there. And the same with the legal guys. Some guys, because they don't understand the world and don't want to take the time to understand the world, they just go, no, no, no. And again, you need to find some way, how do you get to an appeal process, or how do you get to an escalation process to try and get some of those things. And even within the business unit, you have some guys that don't want to concede IP, or maybe do want to concede IP, or see the IP discussion as a way to kick you out as an SI because the next SI coming in is going to concede all the IP. Therefore, that makes them better. And it's understanding all those different pieces to say, how do I start lining those up so that the customer actually sees that it's in their interest to let us have the IP and get some of those things going. So how do we get the customer to see it's in their interest? So conceding IP, generally easy with a customer. Not much we have to do to get that one done. It really then says, but again, I don't think that's really the situation we want to be in. So we have to start saying, how do we get to the negotiation strategy for the more positive outcomes? And to me, that's discussion, starting with retaining the IP. And by the way, some of these discussions are not a one-off. You will, I shouldn't say you won't, but it's exceptionally hard to get a customer to concede joint IP if you've never dealt with them before, and if there's a big customer or, a big manufacturer that thinks they have technology, to get them to, joint IP in the first conversation, very, very difficult. I'm sure people can do it, but generally that's not one we've been successful on. And you have to sort of say, I'm going to move you there a little bit down the road, project by project and scope piece by scope piece. But if you talk about starting at the basics of retaining the IP you bring, the first thing for me is it's fair. It's, you just simply say, I already have it. I built it out over the years. Why would I give it to you and lose the rights to myself? It just makes no sense. And most of the customers will have a little bit of pushback, but in the end they kind of go, well, that's kind of fair. The discussion then says, how do you define it? And that's a slightly different debate, but at least they can concede that conceptual point. If they can't concede that conceptual point, then you start moving on to the lower cost. And, the software toolbox thing of you don't have to pay for development on that piece, or you're certainly not paying full price for the development on that piece, and the commissioning on that piece will be better, faster, quicker because it's tested and known. And they usually concede, well, yep, I can see that. And they may ask for some monies, and they may ask for some clarification on where did that make any difference on the quote. And certainly we found if we can put some of that stuff up, then you can start to get those people to understand those pieces. And let me talk about an extension. Say we had a quality module that had sampling plans, and we needed better sampling plans. Then that's when you can start saying, look, if I do some of this stuff, you already got all these sampling plans done, and I'm doing this little piece of development extra to you, then, out of your quality module, instead of costing $100,000, is now costing $30,000, of which $20,000 is really for this extension on your sampling plan versus generic sampling plans. And most of the customers will start going, oh, okay, I can see how I get value now because I get some of what you've already done, and I get my little piece of extension on a different, for a lesser cost than I would have got otherwise. And that's the way you start to get the people to say, yeah, this is lower cost for me, and you then talk about the whole quality piece. I don't have to worry about the connections back to the core system because those are already done and dusted and tidy. Therefore, it should be easy when we get into commissioning. And the final piece when you talk about how do I retain my IP is that if we give away our IP to you, Mr. Customer, and if assuming it's the biggest project, I have no more ongoing business if I've given away all my IP. I have to either get new people or I have to whiteboard every new solution and my prices will be silly. I can't do that in good faith and still run a business without actually saying I will not live to what I agreed. So, gee, I can't walk that road. And again, most of the customers go, oh, all right, I kind of see what you mean. And if you go through that discussion, and assuming you have a proper discussion and you can get to a proper discussion with the legal and purchasing guys, usually you can get the above agreed. And certainly I found as over the years that the first discussion is usually difficult, but as you get more and more discussions, the lawyers and the purchasing guys bring back the same concerns time and time again. As you start to figure out your answers for their concerns, you get much better at answering those concerns, and the whole thing starts to go much smoother. So I think that's a place where you can start saying a little bit of practice on some of these negotiation stuff, and it gets easier and easier and easier to get the customer moved in the direction you want to get them moved. But it is a practice game. And if you want to retain IP and any extensions developed, and I think this is one that, again, usually, not always, but usually you can get customers to agree to that. And sometimes you can get it, depends on what the project is and what you're bringing and how big a piece you're bringing for this, in the initial solution game and how well you can define that and show that to the customer. But that may take a step-by-step process. It may be part of building the relationship with the customer so that you get, that everybody believes that, you're a partner and not a bit of a shark. But after you get that stuff to me, it's starting to deliver your extensions, if you want to call it that, into groups. And we call them technical process, and the customer specific. So maybe let's go back to reverse order. Customer specific, it says, if I have very specific logic on how I make quality decisions, or very specific logic on how they make routing, or very specific logic on how they do substitutions on bombs, or any of those sorts of things. To me, the first thing you have to do is, unless it's the super generic rules like first in, first out, or last in, first out, or any of those super generic rules, it's being very clear to say, we're not interested in any of that data. None of that data is going to live with us. That's all yours because that's what makes your business unique. As soon as you can concede all those things to the customer, they start to feel a little bit better to say, well, okay, I'm kind of okay. Bearing in mind you're dealing with purchasing guys and technical guys in these, purchasing guys and legal guys in these, and they're very non-technical, they're generally non-technical, you then try and drive them into the discussions about the technical issues and technical process issues. And so if a technical issue to me is the one that says, you have a new operating system. This is the first time we've ever integrated this to Windows 7, or this is the first time we've come to this version of SQL, or this is the first time we've come to Oracle, or doesn't matter, any one of those sorts of pieces where it's basically the same, but you're going to have some different connections going into the different software packages, the core software packages. Usually you can get the guys to say, look, I'm bringing IP, it's valuable, it's got value, and it brings you value, but you just happen to be, by accident, the first one that we're going to do this for on Windows 7. I want the ability to be able to take this to other customers that have Windows 7, and if I concede that IP to you, then technically I can't do that again, or I have to re-engineer it all again. That makes no sense. And usually the legal guys and the purchasing guys will concede, yeah, you're right. I don't really care how it connects to Windows 7. It doesn't make any difference to me. And they will usually then concede you what I would consider to be the sort of the technical pieces. Once you've got them there, you're already moving them into a decision and a thought process that says, oh, there's parts I don't care about. And then you get them to the next piece to say, so let's say we're moving data from the SAP layer down to the MES layer. Do you care how I do that? And if I figure out how to do that better than I've been doing it in history, do you care if I take that going forward? And most of them go, no, not really. And you're saying, if I figure out how to go from the MES layer down to the SCADA layer better, do you care how I do that? No, not really. And then clearly you talk them into the technical layer, so you're saying, so can I have all that? And most of them go, yeah, sure. Yeah, we don't really need that. And again, you can talk them through those technical processes, and whether it's things like moving data and how you move the data, whether it's security pieces, whether it may be some basic quality connection pieces, any of those sorts of things, then you can usually talk them through those technical processes where they go, yeah, that's not relevant to us in our business. And we have to make the point to them that they're not a software business. They're usually pretty okay about then saying, yeah, you know what, I don't really care about those things, so yes, you guys can have them. And as long as we're making sure that those aren't including any customer-specific process pieces that gives away what they consider to be their IPs, then usually you can actually get this move through with a customer once you've built a bit of a relationship without too much issue. And at least at that point, you're now in a position where you're building out your IP. So if you say, I started with a quality module and enhanced the quality module, you're starting to build out your IP. Or if you say, I've got a basic security standards we use for our systems and we're making them better or more encompassing or whatever, then at least you're starting to build out your IP and your IP pieces so that you're actually now starting to build your business going into the future. So then you get to the hardest one. I'd like to retain all the IP. And I don't think, this may be wrong unless we have some very, very small customers, but for any material customer, I don't think we've ever got to this in one throw in the first negotiation or the first discussion. And if you're ever going to get there, you have to be able to define the benefits for the customer. And you're still going to have to exclude customer-specific data. So, you know, that too has to influence how you're going to build it and what you're going to do. But to me, that's the one where you have to start making the point to the customer to say, I'm going to reduce cost. You know, we bring all this stuff that says instead of having to do, you know, it's effectively a library. And instead of saying we've got this library, you know, it's going to take hundreds of thousands of dollars out of your projects. That's the piece to me where you can start to get their attention. And as soon as you start talking about that, and you're saying, look, if I'm giving you some of this IP, maybe you have to concede to them that if you improve the IP going in the future, that you'll give it back to them. That doesn't mean that you'll integrate it for them, but that means any improvements you make in the future, you can give back to them as V1.1 or 1.2 or 2.0, depending on how big the changes are. And again, that gives them comfort because they feel like they're getting something. They feel like they're getting to a position that says if they want to upgrade, some of that stuff's already done. When we talk about, and I'm sure we all have this issue, is that, you know, we have 2 or 3 guys that did a great job for a customer, and the customer wants some ongoing support, and the only guys that really do the support well are those 2 or 3 guys. And, you know, you've got risk points in terms of if they leave the business or if they're on holiday or. By starting to say, guys, we own this IP and this is a package or this is a selection of IP that we as the integrator own and we as the integrator back, that means we've got not just 1 or 2 guys that understand this IP and understand this code. We've got a bunch of guys that understand this IP and code, and therefore we can provide you better long-term support. And we're no longer at risk if Billy chooses to leave and go to another business, or if Bobby retires or any of those sorts of issues. You can actually start to get them to say, you know what, I've got a much more supportable position. And again, that's one where most of the customers go, that is of good value because almost all of our customers have had situations where a given individual has left the business and they're kind of high and dry. This is our way of saying because the IP is ours and because we see it as one of our added value pieces and one of our strategic pieces, we're supporting it with much more vigor than a $50,000 job that we did for you 5 years ago. Frankly, that doesn't have any strategic value to the business to support that long haul, you know, on an ad hoc basis. So by getting to an IP position, we can provide ad hoc support. Whether you choose to provide ad hoc support or not, and whether those are other issues, that's a slightly different debate. In terms of the negotiation strategy, it's saying we can help that customer long haul. And in general, and ASICO focuses almost exclusively on manufacturing, so it may or may not be the same for all of the guys listening, but because we focus on manufacturing, we also start using the discussion with the customers to say, software isn't really your business. You know, you guys are purchasers of software, so why do you want software? Because you're not going to sell it. You're not going to take it on and market it. So why are you so worried about having the IP? As long as we don't hold you hostage, and as long as we give you the source code, so that if, because again, their other concern is that if you've got the IP and then you go bankrupt, that they're going to be high and dry. So you have to work out the mechanisms to say, how do you do that? You can either do that through ESCO, or you can give them the software, you can give them the source code to use inside their business, or whatever you choose to do. But you can usually get the people to agree, yeah, software's not really our business. We just use it to enable our business. You say, but software is kind of our business, so why are you taking it away from us? And again, most of the people go, yeah, okay, yeah, that's kind of right. And if you make all those points, and then you have to look for the very specifics inside that customer, usually you can make the point to them that it's good for you as a company, and by the way, it's good for me as an SI, which means I'm going to be around in the long haul to support you as a customer, which goes back to the very start of the presentation to say, it's all about whether you view your customers as long-term partners or whether you view each job as just a job, let's get it done and on to the next. If you view them as partners, and if the customer views you as a partner, saying in the end, this is good for our business and good for our company, so we're here in the long haul to support you, Mr. Customer, some of our customers, not all of them, but some of our customers actually recognize that as a valid point as well. That helps us get through those sorts of stuff. And if you can get those things through, and if you can get to a point where you've got proper discussions going on and you've got a bit of a relationship with the customer, most of the times as you get into those discussions, the customer starts to go, you know what, it's kind of okay. What we do find, though, as we get into this retaining all IP, we often get exclusions. So we'll get exclusions about what other customers we can use it with, or we'll get exclusions within industries, or some of those sorts of things. And I can't comment for each individual business, but to date, the exclusions that we've had are generally okay enough that we're prepared to take those exclusions because it gets you enough business with that customer. And I think that really comes down to, if it's a very small customer and you're having that exclusion piece and they exclude you from all of the other food manufacturing, clearly that's unacceptable. A very big customer that excludes you from one or two named competitors, maybe that's okay because they're a big enough customer that can get you on and take you somewhere. But that is one of the other pieces that we've sometimes had to deal with as we get into that. Usually to make that go smoothly, you need to have some help from the business unit because they're the ones that kind of help you say, here's their issues. Sometimes they're the go-between. Sometimes they have to go do some homework backwards for you to help make the case. And usually they also have to validate some of the, you know, if you're saying this would cost $1 million without this IP and it costs $500,000 with the IP, they have to do some of that validation work for you. So getting that business unit or a few people in that business unit to support this stuff is really quite valuable in terms of making that all IP discussion go smoothly. And you are moving to a partnership relationship with a customer, so you do have to recognize that you got to give more data to them, you got to be more open book, you got to say, by giving you this, I think your cost is going down by X, and you need to be pretty, well, not necessarily accurate, but it's got to be reasonable that, you know, if you're getting all the IP and you're giving them $10 off, it's back to the, I'm taking risk and I'm getting nothing. Hang on, I'm getting all the IP, but I give you a few $100,000 off. Most customers will start to say that's a value and that's a trade-off that's of value to them. And you have to be able to demonstrate how that's going to be the case. And just, you know, and that usually means you're into fairly detailed documents and detailed design to say, here's the pieces we can bring, here's the pieces we don't bring, or you know, whatever it is, but how do you make them, or how do you help them see that there's value and there's things that you're not developing twice. And the more you've worked with a customer and the more you have a track record of success, the easier the conversations above are. But even with all those, we have a couple customers we've worked with for years and years and years, and you get a new legal person comes in, or you get a new purchasing person come in, and they have to revisit the whole darn thing again, just because they do. And in those cases, they often want to go back to relatively aggressive places, and you have to push back, and you can't give up, because if you give up, you know, A, it's a problem going forward, but B, you then start getting into who's got records that are good enough to say exactly what was developed when and how do we do that, and do we have all the systems in place to manage the branching and the version control and all that stuff. And the answer for a CICO is we don't, and we've had this debate many, many times. We don't think it's feasible to try and maintain some of those projects and say, you know, if you don't have the IP and you can't retain the IP, to say that I'm going to continue on doing some of that stuff and trying to pull some back to our business and some not. The controls and mechanisms to do that when you lose IP, if you've already had it, is so difficult that we almost simply say, if we ever get to that situation, and we've never done that yet, but if we ever get to that situation, we will quit taking IP out of those projects back to our core, because it's too darn difficult to make sure that we're on side and our version control is good enough to make sure that we haven't actually stripped out IP from the customer we shouldn't have stripped out. But the point is, the real point is don't give up, because if you got it once, you can usually go back and get it again. And just because they say no the first time doesn't mean that you won't be able to get it back if it's in your first go-around to get all the IP. Just because they say no the first time doesn't mean that you won't get it a little bit later. So it's an issue that you have to keep coming back to time and time and time again. And often it comes back to at rate increase time. Maybe at rate increase time you say, look, if I forego a rate increase, will you give me the IP? Now the purchasing feels like they're getting something for it. And in your case, you may very well get something that's of enough value to make that worth your while as well. So it's not a direct line. It's not a straightforward, yep, you start here and you get there and it's 2 steps and you're done. It's often a bit torturous and all those other things. But if you get a good relationship with a customer and you're there long enough and you got a good relationship with a business unit and you can show success, we've had decent success for all but one customer getting an agreement to get to all IP. So if I were to finish, I'd say IP is an issue, both in terms of the positives and negatives. I think the biggest negative I've ever seen around IP is if you hold a customer hostage. I don't think there's a faster way to break a relationship and break a relationship forever than using that IP piece. And I think, to me, that if I were to summarize IP and walking this road, it's no different, I don't think, than if you're working in and have typically worked in, say, a Rockwell control environment and you're asked to do a Siemens environment. It's kind of the same as learning that new technology. It's not necessarily comfortable to start. It's painful to start. You maybe lose a few bucks to start. But almost all of us are good at learning that new technology because that's the world we live in. And I'd actually say that using IP and learning to do these things in IP is becoming more and more of the world that we have to live in as SIs. And it's no different than learning that new technology. A bit uncomfortable, a bit painful, takes up some time, but in the end, we all get there. And I think this is the same. In the end, we all need to get there because that's the one that starts to create value, because we all know we do the same solution for customers time and time and time again. The more we can take things from history and roll them forward, the more we create ourselves the firewalls for that debate from purchasing that says, I can get this for 30 bucks an hour and it's going to be just as good. And we all know it's not just as good. And that's your mechanism to make sure that you're not walking that road and getting sideswiped by, frankly, a bit of a silly conversation. But if you lose the conversation, you lose the business. So maybe we won on a moral basis, but we didn't win on a business basis. And I think this is the piece that helps us get some of that stuff done. So John and Bob, that's my formal piece. I'd be happy to take any questions or try and do anything that might be helpful for people.
Okay. Great, Brad. It's a great presentation. I don't have any questions queued up in Q&A right now. I did get one way back in the presentation where someone asked, you mentioned something, talked about extensions, and Peter Bloom asked, what you meant by that. I'm not sure if that's still an open question for Peter. It may not be, but he can let us know via chat or Q&A if it is. Otherwise, I'm going to unmute the phones, so if there's anybody on the phone that wants to participate in the question, they can. All lines are open now.
Well, maybe everybody's coming up night shift. Sorry, go ahead.
My question has been answered. By extensions, you meant new IP that's generated as a result of the contract.
Yep, more or less. And it could be new IP. Sorry, go ahead.
And by IP you bring, you were referring to background IP.
It could be background IP. It could even be specific IP, as in, you know, how am I going to print and apply? I'm going to do print and apply. We're already bringing print and apply, and we're doing this one little piece for you that's, I don't know, I'm trying to think of why it's different, but it's, say we're doing a new barcode system. So, you know, we've done 1D barcode printing, and you want us to do 2D barcode printing. Well, we're bringing all the engines, everything else to get it done, but we're now just doing the 2D barcode printing. Why can I not have that going forward? And usually the customer will go, yeah, okay, I don't care.
Okay, I have a question for you, Brad. This is Bob Lowe. If you, as a CICO, are maintaining the intellectual property on a project, but you want your client wants the opportunity to, because you give them the source code, the availability or the ability to make changes or whatever on their own, and so that, you know, you're not holding them hostage. They don't have to come back to you. So you're saying, okay, we own the IP, but you, in a sense, have a license to do with it what you want internally within your company. Do you literally issue a license, I mean, physically, or is it just maybe like a written document, or how do you materially handle that licensing concept?
So we will tend to just give them straight up, give them the source code. And there's an agreement, usually in a master service agreement, that says they have the rights to use that source code within their internal business. Or it may be in the purchase order that'll say that gets dealt with, but usually it's in a master service agreement somewhere.
Okay. You don't literally like make up what looks like a license.
No, we don't.
Okay, it's just part of the agreement.
We don't put a EULA in it. So there's a few pieces we have that are sort of more like the software toolbox piece. For those, we do have a EULA in it, but we look at those as a licensed product. Now, we charge people $1 so we can keep them, but those are more to us like a licensed product versus work for hire.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. We've got some questions coming in now. I've got one that came in via chat that says, this is from Paul Cantrell. What is the situation with the IP on a piece of code you have configured for a client that you have issued them as backups that are then issued to a competitor when you are, say, unsuccessful with a bid to modify the system?
I guess to me it comes back to, if you say it's for their use internally, then internally means internally. And if that means a competitor comes in and does the code, the competitor comes in and does the code. Does that mean that you may have helped the competitor up and the competitor may take that somewhere else and use it somewhere else? I think the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer that we always say is, we had to work like devils to get our guys to start to not do not invented here. So if you say a competitor sees your code, and especially depending on the project, if it's super strategic, maybe you've got a problem. But if it's not super strategic to the competitor, and they've got a couple engineers working on it, what's the chances they're going to take that back into their business and make that their standard and roll that standard out against you going forward? And I'd say the risk is low. Is there a risk? Absolutely. Is the risk super high? Don't think so. And the other one is, we're not seeing many. It's kind of a leap of faith. We've taken that leap, and the number of times we've been bitten by that and that we've lost a customer, we haven't lost a major customer in 5 years. So have some of our code leaked out through support agreements and other pieces? I'm absolutely sure that's the case. Has that bitten us in the bum? Not that I can tell. And again, I think the other one is, if you look at our industry, we're so massively fragmented that I bet you there's no integrator ever on the planet that has even 1% market share. So is the pie really that tightly controlled that we don't have to give away, or that we have to worry about some of those pieces? And I would say the answer is no, that we have the problem. Or sorry, that we don't have that real problem, that the customers are going to take it and competitors are going to get it and beat us up.
we have a question from Joe Malter. Where does IP start? He writes, in the process industry, things like pump and valve control are common. Do we lose IP if the contract says that they retain it?
I think the short answer is yes. And that's the part where I'm sure that we all have got stuff that's leaked from project to project to project. But I think the absolute short answer on a legal basis is yes. And I'm not a lawyer, so don't get me wrong. I'm not sure I'm the best guy to answer that stuff. And you may argue that some of that's public domain. But, you know, if you've got some, you know, we certainly have some standard motor blocks, standard valve blocks, standard pump blocks, standard, you know, all sorts of those things. And we started getting to it for two reasons. One is it also helped us when we quoted to customers, because we've all had the one that says, oh, I don't like your motor block, or I don't like this and I don't like that and I want to change it. We started to quote to customers that we would be using ASICO standards. So then when they got picky about this and that and everything else, if it's a little bit of change, it was fine. If they really got carried away with some of the change, we then could roll back to the contract and say, guys, we agreed to bring our standards. You're no longer taking our standards. If we keep going down this road, it's going to be a CR. So there's an element of it helps you by saying, I have a standard. By saying that's your standard and that's your IP spot, then at least you're starting to create the firewall that says from here on in, it's our IP and we go there. Is it perfect? I would say no, because, and the honest answer is even for ASICO, if you go back 10 years ago, did some of the stuff we did 10 years ago, was it probably work for hire from a customer? Yes. Has some of that leaked forward? Maybe. So can I tell you which part? Nope. So are we absolutely clean on IP? I'd say no, but I don't think there's anybody in the SI industry that is. And you then have to get into the damages game if you ever get caught legally is, so what's the damage that I took a pump control piece from customer A to customer B? And I'm sure if you went to court and they said, well, that's pretty standard practice, you probably aren't going to get caught for any damages. But again, you start to get into a nasty, you know, whoever wants to really walk that road. And so that to me is the one that says, how do you start to manage that stuff and get it up and in lights?
Okay. Brad, we got another question from Paul Cantrell. He asked, do you protect your IP from staff moving and taking it with them also as part of your employment contracts?
The short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is that we do have employment contracts. They say they can't take IP, but certainly in Ontario, and we have businesses in Oregon and Richmond. They have their right to work states, and Ontario is a bit of a right to work state, so somebody can leave and they can go to a competitor. Does that mean they can take IP? No, it doesn't. So, and what we do is when those people leave, we send them a letter that says, please remember these are the parts of your employment contract you need to live to. Does that mean none of our stuff ends up in a competitor? I'm not sure I can say that. But at least we make the point to people that they couldn't and shouldn't do those things, or they should not do those things, and we highlight it for them. And if they're super bold and they take us on in a very obvious fashion, then at least we have a mechanism to do something about it.
Sure. I guess to add something to that, you know, we do the same thing, Brad, and we go so far as when the person leaves as part of their exit interview, we give them a signed copy of their agreement that they signed, give them another copy. We don't assume they had the one they took when they signed it, and we have them sign something that they acknowledge that they have received that copy.
Yes. Yeah, we don't do that, but everybody does know that we have signed copies of their agreements. So we did take that very seriously about how do we get our employment agreements sorted out. And also the other one that we got caught on or surprised on was moral rights. That's a whole nother debate, but moral rights means that if you want to take stuff from place to place to place, you have to have the moral rights assigned from your employees, not just the IP rights. So that's another fun debate to have another day.
All righty. Are there any other questions?
Well, something I'd like to point out again, this is Bob Lowe. In Connected Community, in the library that is called Member Resources for Managing Your Business, there is an entry that is called Contracts and Sample Documents. So for those who are in the webinar today. If you've never stumbled across that, I'd highly encourage you to go there. Again, it's Member Resources for Managing Your Business is the name of the library, and the entry is Contracts and Sample Documents. And in there you will find what's called it's just standard CSIA terms and conditions, and it addresses IP amongst many, many other things, and you may find some useful language that you can use in your terms and conditions.
And Bob, just to add to that, we've also used that when sometimes we have debates with our customers, we sometimes point them to the CSIA and say, look, it's no different than industry practice, industry standards, what we're asking for. So, and sometimes that helps as well.
Good point.
Okay. Any other
questions?
So we got, Ray Batcher's got one that says, how do you protect the IP from becoming widely known when giving the IP to the customer? We typically do that with a customer where they say that they will make sure that they advise any other integrator that uses that product can only be used for them, or that IP can only be used for them and their affiliates. Does that guarantee that that doesn't go any farther and that other SI might take that somewhere else? And the answer is I don't think it does. And I'm sure that our customers don't spend a ton of time thinking about that. All I can say is it's sort of back to the original thing, is that it's not a big problem, or we haven't certainly seen it as a big problem to date. And maybe we're just lucky.
Maybe. All righty.
Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up then. We're just about approaching 1 hour, so the timing was perfect. To all of the attendees, I want to thank you for your participation, and my hope is that you have several takeaways that enable you to understand the importance of the issue of intellectual property. And if all system integrators begin to do a better job of managing it, our industry as a whole will benefit. Brad, thank you for the contribution of your time and expertise. Your presentation was really insightful, and we wish the best for you and CSIA Integrated Systems. Thanks again to our host and sponsor, Software Toolbox. John always does a tremendous job of managing our monthly webinars, and we appreciate it very, very much. Be sure to complete the survey for today's webinar. It'll arrive in your inbox within the hour, and it only takes maybe 30 seconds to complete, and your feedback is necessary for us to work on our continuous improvement. So in closing, here's a little bit of a bullet list for you to consider. Attend the ISA Automation Week, September 24 to 27. And if you're not CSIA certified but are thinking about it, there's an audit preparation boot camp by Don Roberts of Exitech at the Automation Week. And that's on Thursday and Friday of that week, and that's September 27 and 28. Contact the CSIA office or see the July or August newsletter for details. I encourage you to participate in the new CSIA statistics program to benchmark with your peers. And new to our statistics program is a salary survey that is specific to the CSI industry. So both of those can save you lots of money just by participation and the things that you learn. Encourage you to peruse our new public website, controlsys.org. It's brand new as of about a month ago, and it is appealing not just to system integrators now, but also your clients. And finally, I encourage you to engage in conversations in CSIA Open Forum. Go there to ask your most pressing business questions, or just follow the conversations of others, and you can learn how to improve your business just as you did from Brad's webinar here today. And finally, if you have a suggested topic for a webinar, please include that idea in your survey comments. Again, this is Bob Lowe, Executive Director. Thanks again for attending. Goodbye.